Hey, welcome folks to the Profitable Sheep and Goat Production Call. Matt and I are here again today, and we're excited to have with us John McCabe from Michigan. I met John about 2 years ago when he purchased a ram here from LC Ranch. And John had a couple questions, and him and I were chatting on the phone. And at some point I was like, you know what? This is podcast material. We should just be recording this. Other people would find this interesting. So here we are. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Hey, good. And John, how are you this morning? Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very good, thank you.
Good. So, John, can you tell us a little bit about your sheep rides and how you got there? Give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, sure. So our farm is Moby Lake Livestock in Custer, Michigan, and my wife and I have had sheep. Probably we got to be getting close to that 5-year mark, and that's from the very first animal that we ever brought home to where we're at today. We raise commercial hair sheep, so I've got mostly the biggest influence is going to be Katahdin, but I do have a little bit of Dorper influence, probably a little bit of black belly, a little bit of painted desert, not much, but a little bit. And we raise commercial sheep in hopes of growing our flock to the point where we would look for solar opportunities. That's our end game goal. And right now we're running about 100. I think right now we're running about 130 ewes.
What's your goal as far as ewe numbers before?
My short goal is 200.
Yep.
Right. I gotta make them, attainable goals. So my first goal is 200, then 500, then 1,000, and see what happens.
Okay. Yep.
Why stop there?
Which sounds a little crazy, right? When you say it, it sounds a little nutty, but it's a lot more than the 3 that I originally started with. Yeah, it seems like a lot in baby steps. I don't plan on getting there, this year. That's not going to happen, but keep plugging away at it. It's going to take growing organically through our own lamb production, as well as bringing in extra animals to get there. Otherwise, it just take me too long.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it takes a while to build the shepherding skills too that you need. 1,000 ewes.
Oh yeah. I'm not prepared skill wise or facility wise for that many animals at this point, but that's my goal.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, very good. So, John, maybe you just want to reiterate to us your question. I think your question centered around weaning. So let's dig into that a little bit.
For us, sure. So for us, we're getting close to that point of weaning. Our spring lamb crop starts the 1st of April. So we're getting approaching weaning time, which we'll plan to do in the next couple of weeks, hopefully before Independence Day. And my question, and I'll preface this with saying I had some issues this year with mastitis that I hadn't experienced before, and it was new to me. The issue of the mastitis was new to me, and as I kind of looked into it and tried to determine what caused it, how can I prevent this, in my mind it went back to weaning, and the method that I used to wean our lambs last year may have increased that risk to the ewes and getting mastitis. And I'll tell you what I did last year that caused me to think, and I'll just be honest about it. So I went in and gathered up my mamas and all their babies in the particular pasture they were in. I caught up all the lambs and I pulled the lambs from that spot that they were familiar with. And it was just a cold turkey, gather everybody up, put them on a truck, and haul them to another property. And I think that was kind of just a novice mistake, the way I see it. Number one, the fact that I pulled the lambs from the environment that they were familiar with. I think that put a big stress on the lambs that was unnecessary. I can't say that I had adverse effects because of it, but looking back, I think that I did that backwards. And that cold turkey pulling the lambs off the moms, I didn't do anything to decrease their plane of nutrition. I just yanked them all. And so my question this year was, how can I do that better? Is there a method that I could pull my ram lambs and leave the ewe lambs, my replacement ewe lambs that I plan to keep, thinking that, hey, it might be good to leave them with mama, and let her wean them. I didn't know if that's the consensus would be that that's a good idea or a bad idea, or wean some, fence line wean. Do I just gather up the mamas and take them all to a separate property or farther away from their lambs where they can't see or hear them? So that was what initiated that conversation between you and I. So I guess that's my question. How are different people weaning, and what's the reason behind it?
How old were those lambs when you weaned them last year?
I have a very unpredictable work schedule. So sometimes I have to do things based on my work schedule, not on the best appropriate time for that activity. I don't know. I'm going to say they were every bit of, I believe they would have been every bit of 8 weeks old, but I can't say that they were a whole lot older than that. Okay. And the mastitis issues that I had, I can't say for certain that those were a result of my weaning method the previous year as far as damage to the udders. I don't really know, but I'm trying to improve. Obviously, if I want to get to the point of 1,000 ewes, if I had 5% mastitis in 1,000 ewes, that's a lot of animals.
Yep.
Right now at the scale I'm at right now, I can have, those types of incidents, which are good. I mean, in the sense that I can learn from them. Better to learn on 150 ewes than a lot more.
Sure. Yeah. And so the mastitis you had, was that like
and this isn't like veterinarian diagnosed mastitis. This is farmer diagnosed mastitis with lumpy udders or lopsided hard udders. And so I didn't go ahead.
When did you see these bad udders?
This year's No, it was udders that were in good condition last lambing season. This lambing season being in poor shape or only one side working.
When they came back into milk.
Yes.
That's when you noticed. Okay, yeah.
Yes. The damage would have occurred theoretically a year ago, but I didn't see it, and that caused me to think that maybe I should have a plan, right? Rather than just wing it.
Right. I think probably Matt and I both have had this question ourselves. How can we improve limit our incidences of mastitis? I know I have. I think Matt, you and I have talked about this just on a one-to-one basis different times on how we do it, how we can improve it. So
would you agree that the inconsistencies in their udders that I'm seeing this year would be a result of damage to that udder last weaning? Would you agree with that or disagree with that?
Well, my question would be, did you see, so if it happened last year, they should have had hard knobs in their udder while they were dry. Like some of their udders wouldn't have dried up fully. Like you would have seen where one side is bigger than the other after they dried up.
And this is like 4 weeks after you wean, maybe, or 3 or 4 weeks, right? Am I understanding you right, Matt?
Yeah. Wow. And
I think that's possible. I have to lease ground away from farm for my ewes, and I wouldn't have seen them a whole lot. So it's possible that there was evidence of that, but because they're on a separate property and my travel for work, I probably just didn't observe that.
Sure. And while we're on that subject for people listening, that's a good idea to, before you turn the rams in, run them through the chute, just check their udders. That way, you know, if you have any issues like that, and you can call them at that point. Um, I guess my next question for you, John, would be, so what did you see when you diagnosed the mastitis yourself? You know, was it the lumpy milk?
Yes, lump. I can't say that I had the the icky milk so much as lopsided or hard udders, or kind of, I guess I call it lumpy. I don't know what the right term for it. And I'm not even certain that that's, like I say, I'm not even certain that that's a result of weaning last year, but it gave me pause to consider a better plan from when it comes to weaning.
Sure. Yep.
So Matt, if at lambing time you had a ewe with bad milk, you could strip her out and you would see cottage cheese consistency milk, typical signs of a current case of mastitis.
Yeah.
Do you think that would not be, do you think that's something that happened last year, or is it more of a current, like an environmentally induced mastitis, like something that happened leading up to lambing time?
Yeah, that would be current. Like if it happened last year, the only symptoms would be her one side would be hard, and it might milk a little bit, but not as good as it should be. And it would be a hard lump in there from a prior infection. So that's
what I saw.
Okay. So then it was likely it happened either at weaning, or even just the, in lactation, the time, prior to weaning, it could have happened.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that just for those listening. Just if they're coming into milk and they have bad milk, flaky milk, cottage cheese consistency stuff, that's something current, and it's an infection that happened sometime during late gestation, probably, and it's could have something to do with I would look then at what kind of pens are these sheep in, like how clean, maybe, because those ewes can start leaking milk. Technically, they could if you had a heavy milker getting close to lambing.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
And that the whole mastitis thing is a really interesting topic, and late Dr. Kennedy from Pipeston, that said it's probably the most misunderstood thing in sheep production, and under researched. And I would agree, there's just not a lot out there, and it can be frustrating if you're dealing with it a lot. And without going too far into this anymore, I think some of ours was coming from nutritional aspects. We tweaked some things in our system, and I think we're seeing a lot better results, so less mastitis. But I don't know if I even want to talk on mastitis. It's such a hard subject, and not a lot of good information out there. And then you also get the OPP folks that if you have a hard udder, it's probably OPP. I don't know.
Matt, what do you think? Do you help me understand this? My current line of thought is that once those ewes have that damage to their udder, that udder it's permanent. Correct?
Yeah.
Or am I?
If it's a hard lump in there, that's a permanent thing. That udder's never going to milk again.
Right. And there's no correcting that. You're not going to give them a treatment or some sort of a medication type route that's able to correct that.
No,
it's done.
Yeah. Now, if you have a warm udder, inconsistent milk, bloody milk, that sort of thing, at that point it's still treatable.
A current infection.
Yeah, we can treat her. So we've and we're going to do a whole episode on mastitis if we're not careful, but I know
Yeah.
seeing where we were having ewes that were coming into freshening and having mastitis. That's the
really?
biggest place where we've struggled with it. But that, I think, it was a different type of mastitis than when at weaning, we have a ewe get infected, and a week later, I noticed there's one with a blue otter.
Wow.
Obviously, we're not hands-on with the ewes as much then, but still, it seemed like two different types of mastitis. And the one that we were seeing at freshening is what I thought was there was a nutritional factor that was playing in with that, because we've had a lot less recently here.
And
what did you do?
Go ahead, John.
Sorry, Matt. Yeah. So what did you do about that, Matt? When your ewes are freshening and you find that you've got an issue, how do you combat that?
So we were using again Dr. Kennedy's approach, which is basically, I don't know, you could say a shotgun approach of antibiotics. I think our typical go-to was dexamethasone, which isn't an antibiotic, but that one, dexamethasone, penicillin for a couple of days, and then usually we'd use Restflor or Nuflor, or if we didn't have that, we would replace it with LA200. So a pretty heavy
for a few days.
For a few days, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going to interject here that Dr. Kennedy's recommendations can be found in his book, and he has a bit more detail there. So on this mastitis subject at lambing time, do you not think those ewes usually show symptoms like they will act off and sick? Do you agree with that, Matt? Like they will have a fever, and if you don't address the issue, like they just go backwards.
I think I've never had that happen though. With the ones that get it at freshening, they'll definitely be off, and their lambs will die if you don't do something. But I've never had it happen to where they just, progressively got worse, got blue bag, that sort of thing, which is why I think it's a little bit different form of mastitis. And most times what I've found, and there is different strains to mastitis. I think every farm will have a little bit different experiences with it, but most times what I found was with that freshening mastitis was if we treat it, we can get the ewe over it just fine. Usually she will not milk well that lactation. Like she might have only enough milk for one lamb. What I have found though is oftentimes the next lactation, if we caught it early enough, she'll milk fine again. So
I agree. I agree with that. It's
something different.
Well, there's different, even in dairy cows, there's different strains of bacteria and different types that make different types of mastitis.
Yeah.
And some of those strains are very contagious. Like they will spread from cow to cow.
You think, Leon, that is it a bacteria that is present on your farm that all the animals that are in that environment have the potential to pick it up? Or is it they have the bacteria on farm, an animal becomes infected, and then are they able to, I don't know how they would, is that able to transmit from one animal to another, from one ewe to another? I don't imagine it would be, right? Or is that wrong? Mastitis isn't contagious.
Yeah, I think that bacteria could go back into the manure and other ewes could pick it up.
So what's that plan of action then if we go back to looking at specifically to weaning and what that procedure looks like to avoid the mastitis? What's the consensus as to the best way to wean your lambs, whether you have a small flock or a bigger flock? What do you guys think's best?
Hey folks, we'd like to take a quick break here and remind you that this call is sponsored by Lost Creek Wholesale, your universal feeder distributor. Breeding season is just around the corner. If you're looking for an option to flush feed those ewes or does on pasture, a universal feeder gives you the ability to restrict an animal's intake to a predetermined amount. So if you're looking for an option to supplement those does or ewes, give us a call and we'd be happy to help you out. 717-310-3641. It's also the time of year when shepherds are looking for new stud ram prospects. At least here at LC Ranch, the phone's been ringing. We've had people inquiring. It's the time of year when we start looking at that keeper pen and we start snapping pictures. Hey, look at this one. What do you think of that one? I think you all know what those conversations are like. We'd like to put a plug in for Matt here today at his farm there in Leola, Pennsylvania, Glenbrook Farms. He is having his on-farm production sale coming up. It's only about a month away, July 20th. He has a fun-filled day there. He has some educational topics, as well as his on-farm production sale, where you have the opportunity to bid on some fine sheep. So if you have the opportunity, take a drive out to Glenbrook Farms and enjoy the day.
I think it's gonna depend on your farm. I don't know what you're doing, Liam, but I'll give a quick rundown on what I'm doing, which I actually don't really think is gonna be best in your situation. So what we're doing is that if the ewes are getting any grain, we'll pull grain from them about a week before we wean, and then 24 hours before we want to wean, we'll put those ewes on which usually for us is corn fodder. So we'll pull them right off our TMR ration on and put them on corn fodder, which kind of shocks their system, which is what we want. We want it to just shut off.
To reduce that milk production.
Yep.
Yes.
So, yep. And then we wean the lambs. If you do that, if you do a kind of a hard feed change like that, you don't want to leave those lambs on for too long because they're going to be trying to nurse yet, and the moms are going to shut down. So 24 hours is what we like. And then, we wean the lambs. The lambs go in a barn, and then we move the lambs, but it's a very similar type setup, and it's in the barn. So there's a grain feeder there, there's hay feeder there, there's water there. Then the ewes will stay on that corn fodder for 2 or 3 days, and then they'll go out to pasture or back on TMR. And that works really, really well for us. So,
and Matt, so when you put those lambs in, you change wherever their environment is into the barn, the mamas and the lambs, they can't see each other, right? Can they hear each other crying or no?
Typically, just because they go into different barns, but they're not far enough apart. If I could get them far enough apart that they can't hear each other, I would do that. I think there's 2 ways you could do it. My preference is that they be so far away from each other that they can't hear or see each other. I think you could also make a case for the fence line weaning, but
which is quite different. Right, that fence line's quite different.
It's a completely different idea. I don't know that I'm that fond of it. I think maybe if you're trying to do an older lamb, very low stress weaning is where your fence line weaning can come in, because it can still see mama. I don't know. I find it logistically difficult, and
I think that would be a pretty common scenario, though, especially for a smaller producer who doesn't have the facilities to separate mamas and babies like that. I think that's probably pretty common. I would think.
Yeah, and it works. But like I said, if I can, I prefer them as far apart as possible.
Who makes more noise, the lambs or the ewes?
The lambs do, actually. The ewes they'll settle down quicker than the lambs will. it'll take the first day, it'll be really noisy. Then by the second day, they're starting to quiet down a bit. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And then while you dry, Matt, while those ewes are drying off, so you've separated the lambs and you've reduced the ewes plain in nutrition. What do you look for, and for how long do you watch those ewes after that weaning? What do you look for in terms of udder problems? Because they're still producing milk, but now they're not. There's nobody nursing. Or do you not watch that, or what's that like?
Yeah, no, we try to keep an eye on them for. Usually, it'll show up within the first week if you have an issue.
And what do you look for? What would somebody look for if they were watching their ewes?
Just look for a ewe that's off. If they start getting mastitis, usually they'll their udder will really be swollen up and they'll have a hard time walking. So you'll pick it out pretty quick. And that's also a good time to gauge, if how full are their udders. It can kind of tell you how well your drying off protocol worked. Yeah.
So if you have a mama, let's say you look out into your wherever whether they're in a barn or on pasture or dry lot, whatever, and you look out at your ewes and you go, boy, her bag is gigantic, looks like a beach ball. You feel it. It's red. It's hot. It's fat. What do you do then? Do you strip those teeth? What do you do?
I wouldn't strip it at that point. I'm treating it the same as I am for earlier mastitis, which is, like I said, dexamethasone, penicillin, LA200, something like that. So,
but you don't try to milk her out at all?
I would not at
okay.
And I don't know if that's the correct way or not, but I'm at that point. I don't want to do anything like that.
Because that might encourage more. That stimulation might encourage more milk production. Is that what you're thinking, or
that's what I'm thinking? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right, because for that milk production to stop, those udders are going to have to get full and tight. That to shut stuff down. I think there could be a place where you would want to strip the ewe out, but I agree with Matt that usually I wouldn't. Like, I would treat it.
Sure.
There could probably be a place if the infection was, I don't know if I want to say progressed far enough that there could be a benefit maybe, but I think there could come a place where there could be a benefit to strip it out.
Yeah.
So. And then at what point do you think? What point would you feel confident that like, hey, we've been successful with this weaning? The mamas look good. Is that something that would be evident, or you feel comfortable with after a week or 10 days, or what is that? What is that like?
I would say usually about a week you should be good.
Yeah.
But I have had it where I turned the ewes out and thought we were all good, and then a week and a half later, I noticed one out there with a blue udder. So maybe I'm a little quick on that yet, but it can take a little bit to show up.
When you use that term blue udder, do you literally mean the color blue?
Blue or black?
Or is that a term?
No, it's
so it's literally blue.
It is a term, blue bag, I think they call it.
Okay.
It's literally blue or black, all. And that's at the pretty late stages of
sounds terrible.
Yeah,
that's like gangrene setting in, pretty much.
But
oh wow,
that's what it would be at that point.
Yeah, you could lose half the udder.
Wow,
it's nasty. Yeah.
So I was gonna say, John, that I think if you assessed those udders 3 weeks after you weaned, if you compared, like, look at the big picture, look at all the animals, you're going to see which ones are basically dried down. And if you see something that looks significantly different than the average, those are the animals that maybe have an issue or had an issue.
So you're evaluating your ewe flock. It's been, say, 3 weeks since weaning, and you look out and you have a handful of animals that have obviously their udder condition is obviously different than the majority. What's your course of action then? Do you keep those animals, or is that something that you might consider a cull animal? What is that like?
So what I would do there, it depends on if it's just a small lump, like say if you can feel the udder and it's just a small lump, say a golf ball size or so, that
Mm-hmm.
it's probably going to milk fairly decent yet. I mean, it's an issue. It's something to note. So at that point, I'm probably not calling her. If it's a bigger, and I don't know, like let's say hardball size lump, that side of the udder's probably not going to milk at all. So I'm probably going to call her. So
And what about bags that don't tighten back up? I don't know what the term might be. You've seen that before, probably, I would imagine, where it looks like the udder is it's not tight, it's not full of, it's not in active milk production, but it doesn't shrink back up to what you call a dry U. You can still kind of see that udder, and it just stays that way. I've seen I had one ewe in particular that her udder never dried up. It stayed kind of almost like just empty. And I kept her, being a novice, right? I kept her, and she lambed and was able to milk the next season. I don't know what that's. Have you seen that?
Some dry up differently than others. I would go back, like if the udder's not fully drying up, I would feel it. If there's a hard lump there, I'm concerned about it. If there's not, I'm not going to be concerned about it.
Okay.
Just like a heavy milking dairy cow, when they're dry, they're still going to have a bag on them.
Yeah.
Some ewes really dry up and the udder really tightens up. You can hardly see it. But
yes,
the older the animal, probably, and
that makes sense.
How heavy of a milking animal it is, it's probably going to have more there. But if it's flabby and soft, I'd say it's probably good.
Yeah, actually,
yeah, yep.
And I think, like you said, it is the usually the heavier milking ones, which makes me think of that one commercial ewe I got from you, Leon, that did really well for us, and she would milk really good. And I had her till she was, well, we don't know how old she was for sure, but she was probably at least 10 when I got her, and she would just have actually, probably about for some ewes would have been about a normal size milking udder on her anymore, even when she was dry. Wow. She just didn't, it just didn't tighten up anymore. So yeah, you see those ranges a bit.
That was number 72.
That was number 72. If you look on some of my high indexing registered stuff, I upgraded some of that from her.
Yeah.
She did really well for me.
She was a commercial ewe, and she kept her body condition pretty good too, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We're still working on this one question.
This mastitis thing. So Matt, he asked me, this is the other day when him and I were having a conversation. He said, what about pulling just the ram lambs off and leaving the ewe lambs on? And my first reaction to that was negative. And John, didn't I say that it might depend on what age you were doing it?
Yeah, and I think that question, if you think about it for a minute, it gives reason for lots of other questions and considerations. If she had a ram lamb and a ewe lamb, and you pull the one animal, right? You pull the ram, you're going to have a different. You talked about the tendency for a lamb to favor one teat over another. So maybe that ewe lamb doesn't now nurse evenly. So we've got one side of the bag that's getting no nursing and may want to fill up versus the other. And
right.
Some issues that could occur. And my thought was just that if I'm going to keep these replacement ewe lambs, I would want them to benefit from mother's milk. However, it may be counterproductive to try to keep the ewe lambs in with the moms as opposed to just drying everybody off at once.
Right. I definitely would not do that at 60 days. I think there would be some pretty good risk involved with that. Now, if you were waiting till these lambs if you were weaning later, like some of the pasture guys do, if you were at 120 days or beyond, where that milk production they're just snacking. The lambs are just snacking,
yes,
so to speak.
Right. Mom's kicking them off. They're getting a few sips throughout the day, but not really feeding.
I think that could probably work without any, or at least not much of a negative impact. And there could actually be a positive impact from the aspect that ewe lamb gets to stay with mom. I mean, if you really want to go down that bunny trail, there's a huge benefit to learned behavior with a ewe lamb running with mom, grazing, that kind of stuff.
Right, really unrelated to the act of nursing, just the learning from mom.
Right. So I wean at 60 days like Matt does. He gave his scenario, and we do very, very similar. One thing I often struggle with is I don't have all the other crops happening on my farm, and so the hay I have here, I like to be the good stuff, And so I struggle sometimes to have something poor enough quality for those couple days or whatever when I'm drying off. But
could you add some straw to your hay, or just give them straw? You think that might be a consideration?
I think you could do it with just straw. That's basically similar to doing corn fodder. It just gives them something to pick or add in some fiber. Now,
something to put in their belly.
Yeah. You're probably not going to want to leave them on that for too long, but I think it would do an effect.
You need something for rumen fill, keep that rumen active and working, but not really give them too many calories. So where was I going to go with that thing of when I wean?
Well, you were saying about perhaps just pulling the ram lambs off.
Oh,
leaving the ewes.
Right. So an interesting thing that I notice, I wean at 60 days, the lambs stay in the barn on feed, and replacement ewe lambs about now or in another couple of weeks, some years I'll turn them back out on pasture. Those ewes have had an opportunity to grow out more. They got a little more size to them. They're a little more mature. When they hit the pasture, their resistance to parasites is significantly higher than if I would have turned them out or had them out prior to weaning. And it's interesting that those ewe lambs, even though those moms are dry, I have put them back in the ewe flock after they were weaned for, I want to say, at least 2 months. You don't want to put them back too soon because you could have a ewe come back and milk. I've actually seen it happen years ago where it seemed like some started milking again. What? So you don't want to do it too quick. But those lambs still know who their mom is. I have seen, if you really want to get weird about this, I've seen 3 generations hanging out together, like mom, grandma, and like a granddaughter.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So that learned behavior thing of what they can, being with their mom, is a benefit. And I think it's kind of cool when I after I wean and I put those lambs back out that, oh yeah, sure enough, they still remember.
Yeah. So what would you say is too quick to put them back together, Leon?
I don't feel like I know. I don't have an answer from experience.
If you would have them separated for a month, those ewes should be dry, right? I mean, that's just
they should be. They should be, yeah. I'll bet you, though, that at 3 to 4 weeks, for sure, those lambs are still going to run and try and nurse. Don't you think? For 3 weeks.
They'll probably try.
Well, yeah, I'm saying they're going to try.
Oh, they're
the
going
moms
to
won't
try.
let them.
Yeah, they're going to try, But anyway, we're still didn't get quite to John's question of what he should do for weaning on his farm. But I I was actually going to suggest it depends what your scenario is. Pulling the ram lambs, like you were saying, would be a good option and leaving the ewes in there. But like Leon said, and I know of farms that do this, but it's farms that they're low input. They're
Yes.
basically want to leave those lambs on the ewe as long as they can. So they're pulling the rams once they hit like that 3-month-old mark, more for 3 or 4 month old, more so they don't breed the ewes back. So that's why
Sure.
pulling the ram lambs. At that point, the ewes are barely milking, but then they're just leaving those ewe lambs in there and running them with the flock. So
And
that would be the scenario where I would consider that.
I
And that,
think I like Leon's point and method there to pull all the lambs, the ram lambs as well as the ewe lambs, and supplement their feeding, creep feed. I'm a creep feeder. Supplement their feeding, give them a good solid start where you can have more influence than just having them turned out on grass somewhere.
yeah.
I don't know. That's got my gears turning in my brain this morning.
I like that. That's obviously pretty much what we do. So, I like that method, but there are other options. Depends what somebody's situation is.
Sure, I would agree with that. Yeah, everybody's got their own system.
yeah, so Matt, on your point there on the low input guys that do pull just the ram lambs at that 90 to 120 days, a key point there is that they're low input. Those ewes, let's just take, if we were feeding one of our ewes like we do up to 90 days, that ewe would still be milking pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if she's just on grass, that 90 to 120 day period in there, they're going to start tapering off. And because of what they're getting, they're going to be milking less than what they would be if we were feeding them like we do in our 60-day period, right?
Probably, but even with the way we feed our ewes, they're gonna start tapering off, I would think.
At 90 days.
They are. Even at 60 days. At 60 days, they're on the downhill curve of their milk production.
But even more so, I guess is what I was thinking, if they were just on grass.
Probably. I mean, they won't be milking as hard in general. If
Right.
they're just on, well, I don't like using that term because they can be on really good forages that can be better for milk production than anything we can feed them in the barn. So
That is true.
the low input
I agree with that.
grass or more low input system. Like most of your grazing systems are going to be a not that potent of a feeding system.
Yeah.
Well, did we answer your question, John? Or
I think I certainly gave me things to consider and think about. I've decided that I'm not going to try to keep my replacement ewe lambs in with the moms, even though they benefit from that mothering and they get that more mother's milk. I think it's easier to manage, and I think I'll have a better result weaning everybody. A key takeaway for me this season is decreasing that plain and nutrition for the ewes. I think that's an important piece, I think.
Yeah. And I think since you brought that up, so we used to do more of a gradual decreasing, where we would maybe pull grain, say 2 weeks before we wanted to start weaning. And then we would put them on a lower quality feed maybe a week before we wanted to wean. Not as low quality as we are now, just kind of reducing that a bit. But the issue I found with that is the ewes would lose body condition just in that period of decreasing nutrition.
Wow.
and the lambs are still trying to nurse. They're a little harder on them, I think. And for where I really started looking at getting away from that was with we're breeding our ewes back usually pretty shortly after we wean lambs with our accelerated system.
Sure.
So I don't want them losing body condition. Uh, so
No.
so I had an extension person then that got me on this program, and I really like it because you're not stressing those ewes out as much. It's kind of one, I don't know. The way I see it in my head, it's kind of like turning the valve off and it's done. You know, so um,
Yeah.
for listeners out there that are used to reducing it more over time, um, that can work, but I feel like this has some benefits to, especially for those of us that want to breed right back.
The ewe can almost learn to start making do with that nutrition she's getting if you do it too long. And they're like, okay, this
Oh,
is all we're
sure.
gonna get. This is all we're getting. We'll just throttle the milk production back a little bit,
Yep.
start pulling a little body fat, and then you start, losing that body condition.
Yeah, you don't
Matt,
get that shut off effect quite.
we want to shock them to trigger that shut off, but yet we don't want to stress them. We didn't talk about limiting water at all. You used to do that, didn't you, Matt? And I did too. Some. You never
I
did?
maybe did a little bit, but I know some guys will do that. I think it's a bad idea.
I used to shut it off,
yeah.
but
you don't do. Neither of you do that anymore.
No.
I don't anymore, and I think I know I have even if people ask me what my protocol was, I'd often say pull the grain, and I'd shut that water off.
Boy, that seems rough on them. I don't know.
Just for like at least 12 hours, maybe a little more, before you pull the lambs. I would do it. But I feel like any extra stress you put on that ewe, you're trying to limit stress. You're trying to stay away from mastitis. So anything you can do is going to be a benefit.
Yeah, I
agree with that.
I'm not a fan of it. I mean, I don't think it really hurts them that much if you want to do that, but I don't think it really helps, frankly. So yeah, that's not something we do, but there are. I think I was just as you were talking here thinking. So one thing we should put out there for people, I do know some guys that'll have their ewes out on pasture, and just wean the lambs cold turkey and kind of keep those ewes out on pasture on the same feed they were getting, where they're not shutting them off. Probably if you can do it when the lambs are a little older, it's better. But I know people that do it at 2 months. And the reason I say that is I think I would almost rather have them do it that way than if you have to put them in a small barn that's overcrowded and dirty. You're really opening yourself up to mastitis. So if you have them out on grass like that, you're not shutting off their milk production like you'd like to, but at the same time they're in a much cleaner environment. So it is an option, and I do know people that do that.
I was thinking, who was it that just talked about that? Was it Steve Bull?
I don't know.
That likes to wean on fresh grass.
I think
red wine, maybe.
One person that comes to mind, and I don't know if they're still doing it, was Hurry Lane Farm.
Okay.
What's her name? Henry Schultz and his wife,
Becky.
Becky.
Yes.
This goes back a couple years ago, where I know she was talking about with the accelerated lambing they were doing. They started just putting their ewes out on grass, monitoring them, rather than to do that shut off. And it was working well for them now. I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but that's one person that comes to mind.
Yeah, very good. And just on that pasture weaning thing, you know how sheep always like to lay the same place every night when you have them in pasture? Don't they always lay in
Sure.
that same, under that same tree? That's just one thing that I heard people talk about. Like if you're moving them, or you just don't want them laying in a dirty spot, or you kind of undo your whole idea of doing it on grass. Because when that teat end is exposed
To
that's
pick
when
up
you risk
infection, you're saying?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's when you risk it. So, all right, hey, this has all been good stuff. Any more comments, John?
No, I don't think so. I think it's been a good, thought-provoking conversation. To review, I think both of you said it. At what age do you guys wean? How many weeks?
60 days.
At 60. Both of you, Matt, you the same thing?
Yeah, I'll shoot for 60 days for like the average of the group. I'll wean as young as 6
Sure.
weeks, you know, and some little bit younger ones in there. I'll wean as young as 6 weeks. But that's usually kind of my cutoff. They have to be at least 6 weeks old on the young.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Yeah. John, I don't know if you want to put any plugs in. Do you have a website or a Facebook page?
You know, I don't. I fly kind of under the radar. But our farm is Moby Lake Livestock in Custer, Michigan. There's not a whole lot of sheep in Michigan, so a lot of us that do raise sheep kind of know each other. And if we don't know each other, I guess we should meet each other, because there isn't a lot of sheep production in Michigan. But we're getting there.
Yep.
Yeah. Very good.
Sounds
Very good.
If anybody does have questions for John or would like to contact him, I'm sure we can arrange.
Yeah, and I have an email. It's pretty easy. It's john@MobyLakeLivestock.com. Moby with a EY. Moby Lake Livestock.
All right, there you go, folks. If you want to contact John, you can reach out to him and chat sheep stuff with him. So
yeah, I'd love to hear from other producers in Michigan, because, like I say, there aren't very many of us.
It was a good meeting you, John, and we'll look forward to meeting in person sometime here.
Yeah, I look forward to it. It was a good discussion. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey, you all have a good day. See you, folks.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.